Good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Brown, Granville School Superintendent. Fred Wolf is going to start as board president, welcoming you. The Board of Education just performed their roll call and opened the meeting, so we are officially able to start our evening. And I have to say, just to start, I'm really glad to see a lot of faces tonight. There are a lot of times that we have a lot of important conversations and we don't have as many people that are needed in those rooms. So I appreciate you getting out in the cold weather and taking the time and effort to be here. Mr. Wolf.
Thanks, Mr. Brown. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out this cold evening. We really appreciate it. This is a great turnout. 2 years ago, when Intel announced they were coming, the board realized it was going to be a broader development than just Intel. And we formed a strategic planning task force to start looking at factors contributing to growth and how Granville might be impacted. Tonight you're going to hear from our superintendent, Mr. Brown, and members of the task force about the work they've been doing and some imminent growth that's going to be occurring in Granville schools. Right now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Brown to take it from there.
Okay, so again, thank you for being here. This is being recorded, so if you're ready to take copious notes, understand that you can watch it again later because we're going to record it, timestamp it, and put it on the website for everybody to go back and look at, as well as this presentation will also be housed on the website. We actually have a tab at the top of our website that says Facility Master Planning Process, and you can click on that tab and get any of this information. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce the board. You have John Cronk, Cecile Shaw, Amy Deeds, Fred Wolf, Thomas Miller, and our treasurer, Brittany Triolo. We really have two goals tonight. And I'm going to be challenged because I like to walk when I talk, and I have to stay within this realm in order to be on the video. But we really have two goals. The first one is to build awareness of the past 2 years, as Mr. Wolf referenced, on the efforts of the Strategic Planning Task Force. And so I think it would be important to have anybody who participated in the Strategic Planning Task Force to stand up right now, and so that people can see who's involved. So you can see around. These are community members that volunteered countless hours to do a lot of research on your behalf. Some of that we're going to share tonight. I'm actually going to apologize ahead of time because we are going to throw a lot at you very quickly, so that you can try and consume it and understand it, so that we can start to talk a little bit about the future focus, which is the next step of our agenda, which the goal is to understand the facility master planning process, what is involved, and what your role will be. And we hope that you stay engaged through that process. But first, we actually have to go back in history and look at the last 2 years and kind of talk about some of the things that we did as a strategic planning task force to kind of build capacity in order to make really thoughtful and intentional decisions. So throughout the presentation, and there was a QR code there, throughout the presentation you can click on that QR code, send questions that you might have. Mr. Bernath, the Assistant Superintendent, raise your hand, Ryan. He is going to be aggregating those questions and trying to get some themes that emerge so that when we get to the point where we go to question and answer, we'll be able to collect your questions. And really what that will do as well is create a frequently asked questions document that will also be living on our website as well. So you will have a lot of questions. I'm a resident of this community. I have a lot of questions as well. But part of the process is getting those questions answered. And this is the point in the presentation where I say, if you have your cell phone, just appreciate you, Ken. All right. So The agenda is really going to kind of follow through the 5 focus areas that we looked at as the strategic planning task force. So as that group formed, we looked at, we need to think about enrollment. And when you think about enrollment, you think about 2 things. You think about live birth rate data and mobility, and then you think of land use and student potential. Those are like apples and oranges, but they come together to give you a complete picture of enrollment. So we did a deeper dive into the enrollment studies to kind of give us a picture of the magnitude of growth that may occur. I'm going to go into detail about those later, but I just want to frame some of the goals that we had for that time. The next was housing analysis. This was a pretty intense look at our community, our boundaries, and we looked at, obviously, housing typology, so single family versus condo versus apartment complexes, their yields. We also looked at the zoning in each area of our municipality or our boundary. We looked at what is the housing yield per single family house, land availability, and most importantly, we kind of looked at water sewer analysis because where water and sewer goes, that's where you have development occur. And so we did a lot of looking at maps, and I'm going to kind of reference some of them just so we have an understanding of our school district boundary, because I'm really surprised at times when people say, I didn't realize Newark Township was actually part of Granville Schools, but it is. There's a portion. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The fiscal impact, that's why Brittany's here. Brittany looks at the numbers and tries to think about how that we can fund what we do every single day in Granville Schools. And so we look at state funding, we looked at local funding, we looked at property tax, income tax rates, all of those types of things we looked at in depth related to any potential growth. And then, I gotta go backwards. Then we did a facility study. The enrollment study and the facility study were really conducted by Wolpert, which used to be Cooperative Strategies. Cooperative Strategies was a consultant that we brought in to do that analysis for us, and then we used that information to drive some additional data that we wanted to collect. So the facility study is exactly what it is. It says it is. It's looking at your current capacity, it looks at your current facilities and says, what condition are they in, and what needs to be done to keep them updated, or do you need more of them if you have certain enrollment growth? So we'll talk a little bit about that enrollment study or facility study towards the end of the presentation as well. And then we talked about programming. And programming was really, as we have economic development occur in our community and around our county, how do we best position our students to thrive once they leave Granville Schools, whether they're going on to college or career, but if they're staying local and working, we want to make sure that our programming matches their needs. So those were the 5 focus areas that the Strategic Planning Task Force looked at over the last 2 years. And so some of the data is going to be shared a little bit later, but I'd like to invite, well, actually not yet, Stacy. So let me just also contextualize. So this is Granville School District boundary. Here are the municipalities that we have embedded in Granville School District boundary. Granville Village, Granville Township, Union Township, McKean Township, St. Albans, Newark Township, Newark, and now Heath. So all of those municipalities make up the school district boundary of Granville Schools. So St. Albans over here, McKean Township up here, Heath down here now. Here's Newark Township. So all of those areas make up Granville Schools currently and have since I've been here and since most of you have been here. So one of the things that we did early on in the process was look at land use, because we knew that if we had a lot of land available, that land could be used for a variety of purposes. So we did a calculation, and the main takeaway of this is we have almost 50% of our land in Granville schools that is still ag. And all you have to do is look north of 271 in the Olentangy schools, which I did come from, so I'm going to confess that, 20 or 15 years ago almost, where you have open farmland. Those are areas that can house developments pretty quickly if there's water and sewer available. So looking at our boundary and knowing that 48% is in ag, we started to do a little bit of a deeper dive. And what you realize is some of these yellow areas that are highlighted were already owned by some level of a developer. And so whether they intend to develop or not, who knows? But they were already owned by a developer. And so we started to think about what could the impact be if some other higher density type of homes came into Granville schools. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we already have construction happening. So if you're here just because of you heard about the subdivision going down in Heath, and that's the main concern, the reality is we already have growth occurring now that would actually trigger the very same process that we're going to undergo. The reason is we have capacity issues. We'll talk a little bit about that. So right now we have Mockingbird Hill, we have Willow Bend, we have the Dennison Housing Facility and Village Roots, all of those. And you can see kind of the max enrollment or mature enrollment there that we looked at. But I'm going to talk more about Willow Bend. Does anyone know where Willow Bend is? Okay, good. River Road, right next to Park Trails. It is 67 homes. If you haven't driven by, you will probably be shocked at how quickly those homes are being built right now. As a matter of fact, I heard stories of them working all through Christmas break as they were trying to build those homes. So they are populating relatively quickly, and they will be occupied shortly. So again, there is construction occurring already in Granville schools. So just contextualize that for later when we share some more information with you. This is the Russell property, the MI subdivision. So I'm going to take you back. This is that area on our map. It is the furthest southern border, and really that white block should also be yellow because we own that as well. But it all is considered the Russell property and the Foster properties. Those have been annexed into Heath. And one of the things that we're going to talk about, and some members of our task force are going to talk about, is that annexation process, because most people don't understand it because you haven't had to. But this is the picture of the Russell property. This is the plot map that was provided by the developer that is interested in building homes there. MI is the developer. We did not receive, even though these conversations have been happening for 2 years, we didn't receive this plot map until right before winter break. So we now are really well positioned to have this conversation with the community about the potential impact for that to occur. So I want to draw your attention to this area right here and then this area right here. So this is Grand Point subdivision. Those homes are one home per probably 2 to 3 acres potentially with the PUD. I'm seeing the people from that community share 2 acres. This is kind of how Granville in totality, in the unincorporated areas, meaning the townships, were intended to grow. They had zoning in place. That was kind of the expectation of how that growth would occur. So when he annexed this, and there is a stub road here, so almost a year ago, that stub road conversation occurred, and that went to the county commissioners, and the county commissioners granted that there could be traffic that could use that stub road. So again, these conversations have been taking place for a long time, but decisions along the way have been occurring in a less cohesive fashion. But this is how we were growing, and this is what happens when you have a little bit different type of zoning that is allowable. So where we used to be 1 home per 5 acres, Heath has zoning that is 5 homes or 6 homes per acre. So it's a very different typology and zoning mechanism. So I want, and I heard some oohs and ahs, and I appreciate that. But I want that visual because I think we're going to use that visual not only in this conversation, but in future conversations as we talk about some of the challenges with annexation. So now, I think I can introduce several of the Strategic Planning Task Force members. So I'd like to introduce Jeremy Johnson, Herb Kohler, Roger Stark, Bryn Bird, and Eric Smith. They'll introduce themselves. Come on up, all of you. Grab a mic, because you're all going to talk at some point. I'm going to keep mine. If you could, stay within the window of the tables so that you're on camera. I feel like a production director, but these are representatives from the task force and had significant input in the process, so we're just going to allow them to provide some feedback to you as your residents that helped you.
So as Jeff said, I'm Jeremy Johnson. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Granville Village Council, and I just want to start by saying we really appreciate the opportunity to be here in partnership with the school district. When the task force was formed, Jeff reached out to us, and we had a great partnership before that, but we really enjoyed having a seat at the table and providing input into things as they've matured. A couple of things that I'm going to hit on tonight really are what has the village done historically to help engage development. And so then Herb is going to talk a little bit about what are we doing now, how's our posture changed, how has it matured. Specifically, historically, development has been handled through what Jeff already mentioned. One element is zoning, and it's important to understand zoning is different in the village, and it's different in the township, and it's different in Union Township, as well as Newark Township and McKean. So when you think of zoning, think of things like how is the land to be used, how much can the land be used, and what are the characteristics of the use. So how many houses can you build, what commercial properties can be, and where can they be, and what can they look like. And those kind of, from the village standpoint, even within the village, we have areas that are more strict in zoning and less strict in zoning. So that's a tool that's used, and it really is important to maintain the character of the community at large. Another element that we have, and this is more of a township program, but we work with the township on this, is the Green Space program, which you all, I'm sure, are very well familiar with. It's a wonderful program. It's really preserved a lot of our rural farmland. The one thing I want to point out there, though, is you have to have a willing property owner, and then the property has to be kind of scored and make sure it's an appropriate use of public funds. So just because we have the program doesn't mean we can run down to Union Township and buy that land. That doesn't work that way. We can't even actually spend the money in Union Township. We can spend the money in Granville Township. So it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's limited. And probably, as Jeff mentioned, the predominant way to control development is utilities. When I first ran for village council, it was 2011, we were talking about utilities and where was development going to happen. You cannot have high-density residential and commercial development without water and sewer. And so historically, the village we're a water and sewer provider, if you don't know that. We provide water and sewer throughout the village. We also provide water and sewer to limited customers within the township, some residential, but specifically Otterbein, Owens Corning. We actually supply all the water to the village of Alexandria, but it's very limited. We've kind of had a posture of not going beyond the village boundaries except for very select and specific agreements, and that was sort of a defensive position. In recent years, we've worked really hard with the township to form a JED district. Right now it's one property. We're working really hard to talk with interested parties about expanding that. And that's a joint economic development district where we can extend utilities into the township in select areas. But again, that's not a mandatory thing. Property owners have to be willing to participate. And so it's limited, it's a tool in the toolbox. Some of the things you've probably heard of more recently, with Intel and water resources and other municipalities and major corporations trying to buy land and maybe secure some of our natural resources. Herb is going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like, what we're doing, how we're moving forward. But I would just say at large, our posture is we're working to be more engaged on I'll say an offensive standpoint, because we can't sit back and just say we're not going to provide water and sewer. We can see that other municipalities are going to be willing to do that. So the best thing we can do is work collaboratively with our partners to have a seat at the table and really look to shape what water and sewer can be provided.
Yeah, so much of what Jeremy described earlier on was kind of our defensive posture, historically speaking. The Intel announcement, the development pressures we've seen even prior to the Intel announcement has really forced us to be more offensive in our thinking and strategic in our thinking. And one of those that he alluded to is partnerships with other communities. COVID was a real unfortunate event, but it brought us closer together as a community and as a group of communities, Alexandria and Johnstown in particular. The Intel announcement even brought that a step further. So we already had established relationships throughout, again, our community and with others with similar interests. And when the Intel announcement hit and some of the second and third order effects began, we were able to leverage those partnerships. You may have heard of Southwest Licking Water District. They provide water largely in the southwestern part of the county, but they're growing and they're expanding. They're expanding into townships that are becoming very close to us. St. Albans Township is a great example. So we've leveraged that partnership with Johnstown and Alexandria to create an alternative to Southwest Licking that's based on comprehensive planning and based on the needs and desires of individual townships, and not a desire to just grow and generate revenue. That's been a partnership that we've been into for over a year, and it evolved in what we call the Licking Regional Utility Coalition, or the Coalition for short. Again, an alternative to Southwest Licking that is bringing a local solution to a problem of protecting and managing our resources. Jeremy also mentioned the JED, the Joint Economic Development District. That's really the only developable area in the community along 16. It's in the township. We've developed that. They had their first meeting just a month ago. The CIC, the Community Improvement Corporation, we established about a year in the last year, and that's going to help bring additional managed development and revenue diversification in the community so we can offset some of these costs to the school districts. Another offensive measure is we go to every meeting we can just to gain information. We've been, in the past, maybe not as interested in what's happening around us, but any meeting that we're aware of, that we're invited to, or we can access, we do that, just to generate a knowledge base that we can leverage later. And then finally, we've been very vocal, more so vocal, in the county, challenging, in some cases, the counties, in some cases, the state on helping us manage our destiny. We've hired actually 2 lobbyists, one's in the room tonight, that are helping in that effort. So those are some of the offensive things we've had to, in a lot of cases, forced to do, and that has generated some fruit in the short term and will continue.
Thank you. I want to apologize if my voice breaks up at all, but my oldest son got married this last weekend in Key West, and apparently I left my voice down there, so just bear with me. For those of you who don't know, my name is Roger Stark, and I am one of the 3 trustees in Union Township. I've been an active member of the task force as a resident, as a parent, and as a representative of Union Township. Jeff has asked me to speak tonight about the role Union Township has played and continues to play with the future of Granville schools. Until I took office 3 years ago, I'm not aware that any trustee from Union Township has taken any active role or showed any interest towards Granville schools. I would like to concentrate on 4 areas: comprehensive plans, annexation, Joint Economic Development District, or JEDS, which has already been mentioned, and the Grand Point subdivision, which has already been mentioned by Jeff as well. Comprehensive plans are documents that establish a roadmap into, among other things, land use designations, and density. Union Township currently updated its comprehensive plan in 2024. During this process, people in the community, including Jeff Brown, provided valuable input as to what Union Township will look like going forward. Very little change with respect to land use designations, and density. Union Township still supports rural designations, including large lots and lower density. Union Township's zoning resolution, which is the legal enforcement of the comprehensive plan, is in the final stages of being updated as well. That being said, what is one of the biggest threats to a comprehensive plan? Annexation. That's my second topic. Townships have little or no say in annexation. That is the bottom line. If a landowner wishes to petition a municipality of a contiguous property under an expedited Type 2 annexation, which has become the most common method, then that respective municipality has the ultimate authority to accept or reject that annexation. Furthermore, the county commissioners are obligated to approve that annexation as long as certain conditions have been met. So as you can see, when it comes to either the Russell Farm or the Foster Farm, Union Township had no say in whether they would be annexed into Heath. The biggest downside to annexation, in my opinion, is that the annexed property is now subject to the municipality's zoning code, in this case Heath, and no longer the townships from which it was annexed out of. In addition, annexation has no bearing on current school district boundaries. I think there is a misconception that school boundaries follow municipal boundaries. That just is not true. And from what I understand, it takes an act of God to get that changed. So you may be asking yourself, where does it end? That brings me to my third topic, Joint Economic Development Districts, JEDs. Union Township entered into a JED agreement with Heath in 2023. The purpose of this particular JED was to bring water and sewer to certain sections of Union Township and development in and around Interstate 70. A condition of the JED for Heath's participation was a non-annexation provision. Why is this so important? For at least the next 50 years, the boundaries for which Heath can annex land out of Union Township have been defined. Basically, the boundary in regards to Granville schools is west of Canyon Road and north of the railroad tracks.
I'm going to show that. Sorry, I'm going to show that real quick. So this is the railroad track, and this is 37. So that's the boundary now from an annexation standpoint.
The one concession that had to be made to get this deal done was unfortunately the Russell Farm and the Lee's Farm on the west side of Canyon, which unfortunately is one of the reasons we're here tonight. However, I can go to bed every night knowing that at least in my lifetime, it can't expand beyond those boundaries. Last topic, Grand Point subdivision. I know Jeff already talked about this, but some of you may or may not have heard the residents of Grand Point signed a petition requesting that the right-of-way on Grand Point Drive into the Russell Farm be vacated. The trustees of Union Township signed a resolution supporting their request. The Lincoln County Commissioners unfortunately did not agree with that and voted down the request 2-0 with Commissioner Black recusing himself. I'm not saying it would have prevented the development from happening, but it certainly would have made it a little bit more difficult without access to State Route 37. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you might have for me. Thanks.
Okay, before you transition, I'm going to jump back into the screen because I hope I want to make this point. Because of the conversations that were occurring for the last 2 years, that non-annexation agreement is absolutely critical for stopping annexation further into Union Township. So Roger Stark literally drew a line in the sand. And I think the rest of the community should be thanking him for the next 50 years. Because for the next 50 years, and I've had developers say to me, I can't believe that got done. So that is, it's a huge sigh of relief for the school district, but I really do credit Roger and the rest of the trustees for being thoughtful in thinking more broadly about the JED conversation to actually include an annexation agreement. So kudos to them and thank you. Now I'll transition.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out. I tell you, as a Granville resident, it is inspiring to see this many of our community engaged. So my name is Eric Smith. I have lived here for 15 years. And I will tell you, we have a very amazing community. You know that, right? So I moved here with my family 15 years ago and chose to relocate here because of the community, the school system, the culture. People will continue to move here. I commuted to Columbus up until recently. But 15 years ago, I got involved with this school system because I have had one daughter go through it. I have a senior right now. And I will tell you the value of this school system is amazing. I have funded private school for one, and I can tell you this is a very good value. But it requires all of our engagement as we continue to change from this foundation, right? Intel coming here will facilitate growth. This is a great community with a great school system. We together can move us forward off the foundation, but it requires the community that I've had the privilege to be here for 15 years with. And the reason I bring that up, my initial involvement with this school system was with Jeff when I first moved here because I had a kindergarten coming in. And we were going to have all-day kindergarten. Anybody remember that? Just me? And I asked Jeff, what happened to that? Well, the funding formula changed. And Jeff and I had an open debate, disagreement, and then he challenged me, well, if you don't like our decision, why don't you get more involved? So I did. So you have a superintendent in the school board that wants your feedback and input. That's what's going to make this an incredible transformation as we will grow. So we won't stop the change. And as a community member, I can tell you that, right? There's a roundabout out there. That changed. The fire department is now down the street. There's development going to happen here. We can shape that. And that's what I guess I ask of this group, engage. Because with that challenge, I said, okay, Jeff, what can we control? What can't we? And the school system has continued to strive, right? It's one of the top school systems in Ohio. I just had a senior coming through. She got every acceptance for every school. There is a great value here. That won't change. How we deliver it will. So Jeff, school board, thank you. And the reason that matters is I'm just not watching from the outside in. And what I encourage you to do, there's a lot of dynamics in this. You're going to get a lot of download tonight. My ask is come back. Get engaged with the process. There's a finance committee for the school. I sit on that because Jeff challenged me, well then let's how do we pay for it? Your all-day kindergarten, Eric, because it's your tax dollars. And then the development of the schools, how do we build this out? Okay, where do we go? What's the most value added? So who read the last write-up in the paper about the school system? So I do believe when Jeff referenced conservative hawks, the challenge can cost. I think he saw a few of our faces, mine being one of them. And I take that with pride, right? We want to spend every dollar like it's ours and get the most value for it. And so I just encourage you, understand what's going on in the movement, from the village to the trustees to, you now have a new organization that in September, I got the privilege of being a part of, representing the school system, that was sponsored by the chamber, the village, and the school, called the Granville Area Community Improvement Corporation. Because in our school funding, there are many ways it can happen, but one of them is economic development through commercial businesses. The village, the township, they have plans and zoning. We can influence and attract businesses that build the culture of this organization's, which we are one big organization, this community inside the school district. And so that's the role of the Granville Area Community Improvement Corporation. Attract and bring businesses that fit the strategic plan and culture of this community. It's just getting started. There are 5 board members. The website will be up here in the next couple months. And I just encourage you, we're going to continue to build that, because when you look at the school funding, and our treasurer will do a great job going through it, there are 2 things that really can be controlled, I believe, as a member here of the community. 1, the state school funding formula. We are a wealthy district. Anybody heard that before? So, when I say value, every student in this school system costs approximately $14,341 to educate. We get back in the state funding formula $2,200, which means for every student we get, which we get the privilege and honor to educate every student inside the school district, we have to raise the money that's remaining through levies, earned income tax, business tax. And so we need to attract more businesses here that fit in the JED and our community plan, because we're represented with less business income towards the school than the average in the state. And so the more businesses we get, it's another way to take the income and the tax burden off of all of us, because it shares in that pot. So that's why I belong in the Community Improvement Corporation, because I believe we need the right businesses that facilitate what is beneficial for this community and drive revenue. Because as we talk about these facilities, we have approximately 2,500 students. We're at about 95% capacity
At the elementary.
at the elementary
We'll
level.
see it in a minute.
So we will probably need to build facilities, or choose not to vote for that, not levy it, and go to alternative decisions to house and develop our students in this community. So I just encourage you, understand the formula, understand what's available. The CIC is going to continue to promote Granville as a great place to bring your business that offsets expenses against the levies, and that also brings value to the community. So with that, I'll be followed by our closer.
I shouldn't have been the closer. You did a great job, so that was awkward because I'm going to go back. I'm Bryn Bird. I'm a Granville Township trustee. One of my other trustees, Rob Schatt, is up there. And I have 3 children in the school system right now. I have a half-day kindergartner. Full day would have been nice. Half-day kindergartner, a 3rd grader, and a 5th grader. And so I'm on this committee representing Granville Township. And, you know, just the 2 things that Jeff had asked me just to kind of highlight. One, I just wanted to touch base. I've been reading in the comment sections, and I hear on the streets oftentimes about the open space program and why can we not just be purchasing more land to have an open space. I did just want to touch Granville Township's open space program. It is the gem of the community, and we are so privileged to have that. That was thought up by trustees and community members decades ago. Since the Intel announcement, when Intel was announced, people, I think, thought that we wouldn't be able to add any more land to the open space program, that land would be just too expensive and nobody would be wanting to sell it. We've actually added an additional over 200 acres, and we just passed that Granville Township now has over 2,100 acres in protection in perpetuity. However, that program is funded by Granville Township and Granville Village residents through property tax. And therefore, those funds can only be used in Granville Township and Granville Village. And as you saw, the school district is much bigger than that. And so that is one thing that when we talk about it and people keep bringing that up, I just always wanted to clarify that. But I think one of the big things and final things too that I wanted to just talk about is how our community works together day in, day out. I do not want there to be any idea that we are not talking constantly. To see how Jeff and Brittany and the school board has worked with the Heath community and with these developers to try to get the best plan possible is remarkable. All of our communities have been a part of Framework, which I'm sure most all of you, because if you're here, you're a pretty informed citizen and wanting to be here. But Licking County, a part of Licking County went through the Framework Initiative over the past 2 years through the Thomas J. Evans Foundation, and working with Planning Next, which was a planning company that came out and worked with all these communities and talked about what do we need, how do we develop thoughtfully, how do we make sure we have strong comprehensive plans, that we work on regional water partnerships, that we communicate. Heath was a part of that conversation too, and Heath understood our community's concerns and where we were going to, and so we continually communicate with everybody. Herb has us communicating and having joint communication plans and constantly in contact with each other. And so I do want you to know, we are here also as your electeds. You luckily don't have to answer it, but as your electeds, we are here to hear from you, to listen to you. Sometimes you might know a school board member, sometimes you might know a village council member, sometimes you might know a trustee. Reach out, talk to us. Don't let these ideas of, what you think is happening or rumors that you're hearing of what might be happening or not happening or what people are doing or not doing persist. Come to the source. It doesn't have to happen on social media. It can't happen in person. We are always available. And I think that's the best thing about our tiny community. I always joke I'm a sitting duck. I stand at that farm market every Saturday morning. People can always find me and know exactly where I'm at. So you can always talk to all of us, and we are happy to get you information. We are happy to meet. We are happy to find answers for you. So I just would really, again, get involved, make sure others are not talking without coming straight to the source and asking people information. And again, I just applaud Jeff, Brittany, and the school board for the work that they've done to bring everybody together. And thank you guys for being here tonight. I know you guys are this type of citizens that we love to see that are here and ready to learn. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to let you sit down for a little bit. We appreciate all the information that you shared. And I want to make sure, because a couple of people have alluded to conversations that occurred with Heath and with the developer. Understand, when annexation was brought into the conversation, my response as the superintendent of Granville Schools, knowing that I have absolutely no power or authority in that decision-making process, is to be an advocate for our community's tax base and to try and do whatever I can to get, one, information, and two, potentially anything that would benefit us. And part of that is historical. When you think back to the annexation of Newark with Park Trails, through that conversation, there was a special community authority that was developed because of that interaction with the school system and the developer and Newark City. So part of the process is making sure that we're at the table during discussions, and we have no right to be legally. So it really is just, quite honestly, me pestering people on a daily to make sure that I get information from people that don't really want to give us information at times. So understand that that's some of the role and responsibility that we took on as a board and governance team. So now I'm going to pivot and go back to some data, and then we're going to talk a little bit later about the facility master planning process, and then we'll get to question and answer. But I do want you to have some understanding of enrollment and capacities. So traditionally, Granville Schools has a relatively slow growth curve upwards. So typically when seniors graduate and they're the last kid, people sell their homes, more people come in, and we have this exchange of homes, and enrollment sometimes fluctuates, but it's a gradual increase. And then you have environments where a new subdivision goes in and things escalate relatively quickly. Then you have things like a housing market crash, and that drops enrollment at times. So you have all of these fluctuations in growth. So you can look at a historical trend pretty easily and say, okay, what's our mobility factor? Meaning, how many kids do we gain or lose from first to second grade to third grade? And we factor that in. The X factor is kindergartners. And we look at kindergarten through live birth rates. So we look back and say, how many kids were born 4.5 years ago? And that's what we expect. And then sometimes we're surprised by the number of students that come in. Sometimes we're not. We're spot on. But really, the historical enrollment side of the equation is pretty easy to predict. The thing that is a little bit more challenging is the student potential when you have different land use occur. So factoring that into the process is a little bit more challenging. And this is what that curve looks like. So this was also done by the Cooperative Strategies Group. And basically what you're looking at is a lot of years, which don't even try and read that. But what you'll see is if we start growing by 60 units per year, 60 meaning 60 homes per year, what happens, what's our growth curve? And what you'll see is it starts to increase relatively quickly, to the point where we could potentially double enrollment in 25, 30 years. One of the things that I think is important to understand is right now we're making decisions today that impact 25, 30, 40 years down the road. So it's very important to look strategically and say, what might the magnitude of the wave be? And just to give you context, when Park Trails came in, they were building 100 homes a year for 5 years. So you do have history in this community where you could potentially build that many. I think it's funny that we have 60 units right there and Willow Bend is 67 and it will probably populate within 1 year. So it is pretty predictive and you can adjust the model. Typically in a historical perspective, we added about 20 homes per year. But when we have other spikes occur, then it can go up to 100. So all we're trying to do is predict if land is utilized, what might be the magnitude of enrollment? Because then that brings you to your facility conversation. So let's talk about our facilities. We did a facility assessment and we looked at capacities. So if you look, our elementary capacity, meaning elementary and the intermediate school, are roughly 90 or 95% occupied. Meaning Travis Morris at the elementary has a really hard job. How many of you would like to have 750 kids under the age of 10 in your care every single day? That guy does, right over there. His hair is way, yeah. So, our capacity is high in those buildings specifically. And actually, the elementary, how many people remember the old preschool that was behind the elementary? It was a separate building, yeah. We actually went through and refurbished that space so we could make it classroom space again. It used to be our maintenance warehouse. So we reconditioned it and now we have classroom space out there. That's why it's at 90%, not 95%. So again, we try and do things to add space that aren't high dollar amounts. But this is the issue, this is the driver for why we're having this conversation. Because if we have 60 homes per year, even with Willow Bend or Russell or whatever comes our way, we will exceed our capacity relatively soon. So what do? Initially, you try and acquire land, and you try and create a plan to create the delta between when your existing facility runs out and you have a new facility for students to go to. And sometimes that means modulars, okay? So this community has had a history of placing modulars in the backs of buildings in order to navigate that change before a new building is built. So there is history to that. Is that the worst learning environment possible? Absolutely not. But is it ideal? Absolutely not. So again, we're going to try and navigate that delta at different times. The good news is, the complex that you're in right now, the middle school, high school complex, is at 80% capacity, and it has a little bit of wiggle room to grow. So we have a little bit of an ability to manage some of the growth at the upper grade levels. The other thing about enrollment is they never come in the same grade level. Get it? So they're always coming in at different grade levels. So sometimes you have a bump in enrollment in 6th grade that you weren't anticipating through mobility. Other times it happens in other grades. But we do have capacity, but at some point, a middle school concept, if this campus became the high school only, it might be in your future. You will be talking to a different superintendent at that time, I promise you. Because that is way out here in this curve. So it's probably out in this direction versus, closer to my tenure. So this is also a why standpoint. This is why we're having this conversation. We are going to have a facility master plan in order to accommodate future growth. And that is where you are involved. So I know I don't do Facebook or social media because I care about my mental health. And I know people think Jeff Brown has a plan. Well, of course I do, in my head. Because that's what you pay me for. That's what they pay me for. But from a community perspective, that plan goes through all kinds of iterations to say what is in the best interest of our community, and everybody puts in input and gives options, and then the Board of Education makes decisions about the future direction of the schools. But this is your opportunity to provide input. There are going to be 2 other meetings, and that's just on the planning process for, the broader Granville schools. If a decision is made to build a building, then that initiates a design process as well. So this is the first step. This is planning, not building. Okay? I want you to remember that. This is planning, not building. So keep that in mind as we continue to have conversation. So again, we are talking about the Russell property. However, I want to take you back to, and I apologize for skipping around so much, but there is a lot of property up in the Newark Township area that is probably also at risk for one annexation and or development. So the reality is this community is going to be faced with these conversations in the next several years. And so it's going to be ongoing, and it's because people will want to come to Granville schools, and that's a positive, but it also has an impact. So speaking of impact, let's talk a little bit about the fiscal side of the equation. But just to give you a little more detail on Russell, sorry, Brittany, I jumped the gun on that. Just to give you a little bit more information on the potential timeline for the Russell property, they are going to Heath Zoning and Planning in Q1 of 2025. So if you care to visit Heath Council or Heath Planning, feel free. They are open meetings. So if you have thoughts and you want to articulate them, I'm sure they would be glad to hear them. 2025. I turned my back at that moment. 2025 through 2026 will be the design and engineering phase. They anticipate that home sites will be under construction in the spring of 2027, and in fall 2027, there may be homes built with students occupied. Now, a subdivision of that magnitude does not go in overnight. You will probably see a 5 to 8 year build out, where you will see, upwards of 67 homes to 100 homes built every single year. So, this is information coming from the developer. Developers like to build fast. Municipalities work slow. So again, this is out in the horizon, but from a school district perspective, we need time to go through our process to figure out what we're going to do in response. Now, let's talk about finances. So Brittany is going to share our 5-year forecast and some calculations that we've done based on the subdivision that we've shown you.
Okay, so just want to first take a minute to explain that the 5-year forecast is submitted twice a year and includes 3 years of historical data and 5 years of projections. So the graph shown on the slide is what we look at every time when we present the forecast. This is the overview graph that we compare every time we update. So the black bars represent the total revenue in each year, and then the light gray bars represent total expenditures. The lines, which are probably kind of hard to see on the screen, represent the cash balance as well as our cash balance policy. So over time, the green line represents the declining cash balance as expenditures begin to exceed our revenue in each individual year. So after we passed the income tax, our cash balance grew and has been increasing each year. This year is the first year that we're expecting to deficit spend in the current fiscal year. So once you start doing that, your cash balance starts declining. The important thing to, as a point of reference, as your cash balance is declining, is to look at your cash balance policy. So our policy has a minimum and a maximum, so that we're not keeping too much cash on hand. We don't want to have more than we need, but we also want to make sure that we have sufficient cash balance to accommodate cash balance fluctuations throughout the year. So that is represented by the blue and the orangish lines. So you can see that the years at the bottom represent fiscal years. So the current year that we're in is 24-25, which is the fiscal year 25. So when we start to see our estimated cash balance dip below our cash balance policy, that is our indication that we would need an additional operating levy. So that is in 28, fiscal year 28. And then in fiscal year 29, you can actually see there's another line below the green line, and that represents our cash balance without the income tax renewal. So that in 29 is actually a negative cash balance. So all of this is to say that this is what we're looking at without the Heath development, because that is based on the timeline, has very little impact on the years that you're actually seeing on the forecast at this point. So this is known factors, that development aside. So then on the next slide, this is the actual financial impact of that development. So to try to keep school funding simple as possible for you tonight, we have 3 main sources of revenue. Property tax, income tax, and state funding. So what this development will generate is additional property tax, and our estimates on the screen are based on the number of homes and the value ranges that MI provided us during our meeting, and those are listed at the bottom. So a majority of the homes are going to be 500 to 600,000, and then there's a portion that's 600 to 800,000. The numbers that I have for the revenue are based on the lower end, so those are more conservative. The second source of revenue that we will receive from the development is additional income tax. And this one's a little bit harder to project because we really don't get a lot of data even on the income tax that we're receiving now. So it's even harder to project what future residents' income might look like. So we are assuming a household income of $200,000. And really that's just based on what we know of the home value, what could potentially be required with the additional taxes for a mortgage payment. And you will note that there is no state funding listed as additional revenue from this development, and that is because we are on what's called the guarantee. So to put it as simple as possible, we will not receive additional revenue from the state as enrollment increases due to this development. So we don't have any anticipated revenue from the state due to the increase in enrollment from the development. Okay. So in total, we're looking at about $3.2 million of additional revenue. Compare that then to the estimated expenditures, and this is just the operating expenditures. Okay, and that's based on, as Eric mentioned, a little over $14,000 per pupil to educate annually, and that's based on today's value. So at that and at maximum maturity at 1.6 students per home, we're looking at $12 million in operating alone. So the facility issue is completely separate. So just isolating this development itself, that would be a deficit of $8.7 million just from this development, between the difference of the revenue it's going to generate and the cost to educate those students. Unfortunately, I don't get a fun job of sharing any good news with you, but...
Thank you, Brittany. I do want to call your attention to this word right here. It's called assumptions because, again, we're trying to extrapolate information from developers and people, and so we have to make assumptions. Obviously, there are risks in the assumptions that we create, so those numbers aren't exact. They're just estimates to model something for you. Now, as Brittany alluded to, the fact that that's operating, when you build a building, you pass a bond in order to build that. That's a separate levy. It's specifically designed for that growth. So when you're talking this conversation, if you know your local representative, here it's Thad Claggett and Tim Schaefer, make sure you talk to them. Ask them about the funding formula. Ask them about the revenue that Granville schools receive. Talk to them about this issue. As Herb alluded to, we actually have engaged a lobbyist to have those conversations on your behalf. Dan Dodd, wave your hand. Okay? So Dan is a resident of Granville, but he's also a lobbyist, and we've engaged him to have specific conversations about not only the funding formula, but specific infrastructure needs for school districts like Granville. Granville will receive $0 for the building of a new building from the state of Ohio. It will come 100% from our local tax base, unless we work something through a budget process, because this expected growth is on the heels of economic development that the state of Ohio placed in Licking County. So there is an argument to be made that there should be some type of infrastructure follow through with dollars for buildings and infrastructure. So understand that we're going to try and accomplish that through a variety of different efforts, but if you want to be engaged, Dan will give you his card if you have him here. If not, we'll put his name on our website so that you can reach out, and if you have influence in any way, we'd love to have you participate in that process. So now I'm going to pivot. I'm going to pivot to our representatives from Fanning and Howey that are the facility master planners. So their job is to help us develop an option or options for what we might do with growth. This is the first community event. Usually it's more them talking, but we had 2 years of information to share with you. So again, I apologize for how much data we were going to give you, and now you understand why. So I'm going to introduce Jen Fuller and Emmy Beeson from Fanning and Howey to talk a little bit about the facility master planning process, and then we will get to questions. Ryan's been capturing them, and we will answer a lot of them quickly.
He doesn't trust me. He saw me earlier today. He knows why. Thank you for having us. I'm Jen Fuller. I'm an architect with Fanning Howey. We are an architecture engineering firm, and we focus solely on educational facilities. Specifically, K through 12 is maybe 90% of what we do, and some higher ed. So we're passionate about educating students, working with communities, because we know the schools are the heart of the community. It's been wonderful to get to know your community, and I got a lot of info in here tonight too. I've seen a lot of this, but it's a lot to take in. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things, not focused on your annexation and stuff like that. So it's going to be a little more fun, a little more lighthearted, I think. I feel like the room just is weighed down. So we're going to liven it up a little bit. I did want to introduce, we had another person on there, Jennifer Adams, and she works with us kind of at this community engagement and planning level. She's a former superintendent, so we're kind of trying to talk the same language as the educators and architects and engineers. She sort of tones down maybe some of the things architects might say so everybody can understand them. And then I'll have Emmy introduce herself.
Hi, good evening. I'm Emmy Beeson. I'm the Executive Director of Partnerships for Authentic Learning and Leadership. We're a nonprofit out of Columbus, Ohio. We have an exclusive relationship with Fanning Howey to work on the educational visioning portion of master facilities planning. I am a former school superintendent and really fell in love with master facility planning and design when I was having similar discussions and looking at the possibility of what changes in school facility or new schools could do for my particular community. And it was really the voice of my students who said, what if, what if, what if? That made me really look at school facility as a tool to get toward our educational vision. And so we'll talk a little bit about how the vision piece plays into the overall master planning, really based in all of the logistics that you've sorted through.
So with that, we do want to talk a little bit about the process, and that's, we're going to continue to sort of reiterate the process. It's a planning journey. I think you've probably seen this graphic a couple different ways. We're going to keep putting it in front of you so you understand too, especially as Jeff said earlier, we aren't designing anything. We are not building any kind of facility right now. We're gathering information. We want to see what is the best fit for Granville. And so right now we look at it in a couple different ways. We want to collect information, so we're collecting that. All the data that was put in front of you, all the capacity studies, the enrollment, facility conditions. We've been in your buildings, our team of architects and engineers have been in, we've analyzed, just to see maybe what's working, what's not. We've got some older facilities, but great facilities. Your team has done such a good job keeping things going, educating students. It's really thriving. You've got spaces like we're in now that can support community events, community meetings, can keep the arts going too, so we love that, and that's part of that process and those findings. We want to talk about that in 3 different buckets too. We look at, I need this, no, you can go back to that, I can talk about that now. We look at building conditions, so we collect information on those conditions. We look at enrollment, capacity studies, the things that Jeff talked about earlier, and then I'll have Emmy say a few words on this. We look at it also in educational visioning and that side of things too.
So certainly like all of the logistics that you have discussed tonight, back to what we really want for our kids in our school, right? And that's the lens through which we look. So if you can see up there, and one, how do we serve every student? How do we maximize the great things that we're already doing? Continue to build that and shape that for whatever that looks like in the future. And that last piece is really about planning for adaptation and flexibility. I mean, I think about what the world was like 10 years ago and think about what school is like, and I can't imagine what school's gonna be like 20 years from now, but you will be educating in the same facility 20 years from now. So how do we really think about flexibility and adaptation for whatever could be coming, almost future-proofing, but keeping our vision aligned for what we want for our schools. And then all 3 of those buckets play together to create an overall master facility plan for your district.
And if you go back, sorry, one more, just real quick. So we're not only collecting, we want to connect with folks. So we'll have a timeline of other community meetings. We're working with your task force in that planning process. We will then create options together based on all of that data collection and all the feedback that we're getting, some questions tonight. We'll create options on what is the best plan moving forward in a facility perspective. again, with that visioning as part of that puzzle piece. And then at the end of the day, we hopefully can come together. We've got all this data collection, all the things that say, okay, this is what Granville needs, and potentially with help from treasurer, this is what it's going to cost. And then we can all kind of buy into that. We're confident moving forward that this is the best move and decision for Granville. So then, as we talked about the Venn diagram and how that works together, just kind of a, I'll say quick timeline, but all of this planning doesn't just happen overnight. So right now, you look in the red area, and we'll call that, okay, we're master planning. We're collecting all that information, we're talking to the right folks, and all that data, and we're not building anything yet, right? We're talking about the things that Granville needs and what could possibly be builds, renovations, different things along those lines. Then we want to talk about how we're going to finance it, messaging it out to everybody. Is it a bond campaign? It sounds like, yes, it might be, right? Based on how many students and what the state is not going to fund and whatnot. So we want to talk through that, make sure that everybody understands what that looks like. And then we get into a design situation, right? Now we're looking at a facility, now we're building something, and that's still a few months of design, and then we get into construction. So there's a lot of collection of information, there's a lot of planning. Things like this don't happen overnight, especially when you see the residential, that might not fill up for 8 years, you know, some of that planning. So we know all these students aren't gonna come in tomorrow, so we wanna go through this process and be thoughtful about it, take in all the information, and then make sure that we have the right outlook and the right decision for Granville. And then,
yeah, so we kind of have like 2 tracks running. I love that you were able to share, Jeff, the timeline of how you're thinking about homes coming in, and then say, gosh, if it's this long, then what are we doing in that gap time in between to be ready for it? So that's the timeline that you just saw. And in that, while we're talking about logistics and budget and programming and facilities, a parallel track running right alongside of that is this idea of visioning, where we're really, we are really getting clear about your educational vision, right? Architecture decisions later are based on how do students and adults spend their time. And so really knowing who you are and the kind of education that you want to provide for students is what will drive all of those decisions inside of that work. So these are kind of the big buckets that we think through. We go through an onboarding process with districts very specifically to make sure there's no surprises. We all are speaking the same language. Our expectations for how the process will work are clearly communicated. And in that process, we go through several different workshop experiences to understand what are your values, what are your non-negotiables, how do we share information with teachers and building principals and central office so that we're all really on the same page. And you can see with the check marks, the work that we've already gone through, equipping leaders. Before we hold any kind of staff meeting, staff visioning, which we've done the last 2 days, we meet with your building leadership and your central office because, you know, from my experience, I don't want some consultant coming in and saying something that I didn't know they were going to say, right? Like no surprises. And so really working with leaders to make sure they understand the process and support them because they already have full-time jobs. And this is not it, right? But how do we help them move through that? And then the next bucket right there is that educational planning and visioning. And so the task force has been doing a ton of that work. They're represented here tonight. They've been planning and thinking. But then we start to shift that from logistics to educational vision. And so for the last 2 nights, we've spent a couple hours with staff members, 7 through 12 and K to 6, asking them about their desired student experience. What are the kinds of spaces that will help create those desired student experiences? What is it that they want to see for students moving forward? And all of that information, plus student focus groups that have already been completed around what makes learning meaningful for students. All of that gets piled together to move us into this third phase where we really work at creating guiding principles for this process. It's like creating guardrails and a North Star for your process so that as we move down the road and things come up that we couldn't even anticipate, we are still anchored in what is it that we set out to do. We set out to shape education in our district in this particular way. All right, we know what the guardrails are, and that helps all of the decision makers. It helps the Board of Education to know where they're going. It helps architects to know where they're going. It helps teachers and community members all to be on the same page. All of that information gets put together to support messaging and to support your bond committee in moving forward with anything that they would choose to do related to whatever facilities option ultimately gets chosen. One of the pieces that we worked through in the roles and goals meeting is understanding this. And so really important to us from the very beginning is to know how our decisions going to be made, who's going to make those decisions, how are we gathering input, how are we vetting the input that is being gathered by all of these different groups. So you can see in these first 3 columns that we have points of contact for information in the process, and then the second one, providing input from all of these different stakeholders, and then the third group, providing that information to be reviewed by. And so the goal during those kind of 3 phases is building consensus, right? When we're talking with teachers, understanding their vision, when we meet back with building leadership, building consensus among the direction they want to go, your task force working together to build consensus around what is the right direction for our school district. But then when we get to this 4th column and we need to review and select and start sorting to make decisions, then we come into a consult model, right? Where not everybody can have a say at the end of the game. And so the consult is we've listened, we've heard, we've balanced, and now we need to make some decisions that ultimately come to the Board of Education, allowing them to make appropriate decisions for the whole district based on this model. So this is really helpful for us to know where information is coming from and who are the decision makers during both the visioning process, but also the entire master facilities planning process. I think this is you.
Yeah, so I know that Jeff's going to talk about it, but we mentioned we're taking in all your information, we're working with the task force, and we have other community meetings planned, that it won't be all about expansion and annexation and things like that. We will be a little more focused on those into what your community needs in terms of educating students and your facilities. So Jeff, I don't know if you want to go over this. Obviously, This will be available. It'll be on your website, it'll be part of this presentation, but we've got some meetings set up over the next several months to dive into all of those process questions.
Yeah, so if you have the opportunity to put these on your calendar right now, please do so. February 25th and April 15th. I will tell you, this is the one night that we could host this event because of how often this facility is utilized. Those are the only events or only times that it's available. Otherwise, it's play season or concert season or you name it. So our facilities definitely get utilized. So there's that QR code again for questions. Ryan's been, collecting and aggregating questions. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes rapid fire answering questions right in front of the camera. And then, obviously we'll close around 8:30 so that you can get home. I will probably be out driving at 4 o'clock in the morning because apparently it's supposed to snow. Yes. Everyone's texting me, have you been watching the weather, Jeff? Strategic planning doesn't mean anything compared to snow day calls. So, Mr. Bernath, what do you got?
Okay, rapid fire. How was Heath able to annex so rapidly?
Okay, as Mr. Stark referenced, they went through an expedited annexation process. That really does, as it alludes to, it expedites the process because you have a willing landowner and a willing municipality, and it goes to the town or the county commissioners for approval. So there is no mechanism other than I went to the Heath City Council and told them that how this might impact Granville schools and tried to share that information with them. But ultimately, it can happen without any process that can impact the outcome other than those entities making that decision. And it does not change the school district boundary. That is a absolutely critical piece of information that people need to understand. Municipalities can annex townships, but it does not change the school district boundary. Go ahead.
So related to that same question, where can residents find more information about that annexation rules, laws, and so forth that are governing all of this annexation and non-school district boundary change?
Okay. One, you can go to Ohio Revised Code. Two, you can maybe ask Paul Rudder on your way out. Paul's a local attorney, also a Grand Point resident, recently moved, but he's well-versed in the legal language of annexation. But yeah, it really is articulated in Ohio Revised Code. Next.
What would it take to reshift that back to Heath if there is a pathway? Again, just reiterating what that process would look like.
Okay, so boundary transfers occur through this Ohio State Board of Education. So the State Board of Education makes territory transfers. In order for that to occur, both the outgoing and the incoming school districts must agree, and the landowner. So no one's going to agree to that. Heath does not want these homes. Heath is already building a lot of homes on their own too. So I think that is, Stephanie Dodd's in the room. She was a State Board of Education member before. Those territory transfers are very rare, and it's very difficult to accomplish, if not impossible.
Could the village annex and conform its boundaries to the school district boundary to reduce risk of further annexation and development down the road?
So now you're getting out of my wheelhouse. However, there is a process that you could go to through the annexation of those boundaries, but I do believe it requires a vote. Bryn, do you?
You would have to go to a vote, and then every landowner would have to agree.
Yes, every landowner would have to agree, and it does go to a vote. Obviously, a very large way of, or a different way of approaching that issue.
What does the non-annexation agreement mean if there's still potential annexation possible by Heath and potentially Newark in the northeast part of the district?
So the non-annexation agreement is specifically with Heath municipality for Union Township only. So again, it is that one area that I outlined on the map that is the railroad and 37. Roughly.
It can't get to 37.
Oh, it can't get.
It cannot get to 37.
Oh, okay. It can go
37 is off limits.
Canyon.
Canyon Road.
Canyon.
Other than Russell and the Lee's Farm.
Okay.
It's in Granville schools.
Yes. So I was wrong. Canyon Road and up to the railroad tracks that is in Granville schools currently. Yes.
This might be a rhetorical question, but does MI Homes and Heath even care what we think? Do they care about maintaining Granville's small town character? And why wouldn't Heath City and the developer want this development in Heath City and Heath Schools boundaries?
It's not in Heath Schools boundaries. It's in Granville Schools boundaries.
Redistrict.
They do, they understand now the impact of something of this magnitude on Granville. I would say that their interests are different than ours. And other than that, because this is being recorded, I'm not going to speak anymore about their potential interests. And we have Alan Miller here too. So,
who pays for road improvements, infrastructure, and so forth in these developments? And are they required to provide funding for schools? As an example, there was a special assessment in Park Trails. Are developers required, or can schools require that special assessment in that development?
So we cannot require a special assessment. A special assessment has to be agreed upon by the developer and the municipality. There is a special assessment for the MI subdivision of what we've been told, 6.5 mils, and that special assessment will go to the city of Heath. For roads and infrastructure, for the development.
What about water and sewer?
And water and sewer.
That's it?
Yeah.
Is that enough?
I don't know their calculations well enough to speak on that. But that money, traditionally, we will still advocate for a portion of that millage to come to us or additional millage be applied. There are areas in other school districts where there's up to 10 mils assessed on top of a property. So it can go higher. It's really expensive, but we will advocate for that on your behalf.
So Jeff, you mentioned the Heath planning and zoning process, and that is coming up here in Q1 of this year. Is there any interest or provision in those discussions about the impact on the school district that is being impacted that's not Heath in those conversations? And what do you suggest residents do if they want to make their voice heard?
Go to the meeting. Most likely I'll be there, so I'll say hi. But I think it's important to voice your concern to the people who are making the decisions. But it is zoned already. It really is going through the technical planning process. And one of the things that has occurred is there was a completely different concept map well before what you saw there. The concept used to include multifamily apartments and a residential or an elderly facility. That's probably not the right language to use. Senior center, thank you. Sorry. I'm getting there myself, so it's all good. Yes. So the map has changed based on some of the zoning that they would approve. So because it's now all single family, they actually have to get rezoned for single family for the entire property.
Yeah, so did Willow then.
So did Willow then, yes.
Next few questions are fiscal related, so Brittany, these might be as much for you as anybody. What is the guarantee that you spoke of with state funding? Can you give a brief description of what that is?
Yes, so the guarantee means that you are guaranteed to receive the same amount of state funding as you did in fiscal year 2020. So that means that as your enrollment increases or declines, you would still receive the same amount of funding. And most districts in the state that are on the guarantee are experiencing decline in enrollment. So for them, it's not as big of a deal. For a district like Granville, we're on the guarantee because of our relative wealth. And so based on the formula, we would actually receive less funding. But the problem with being on the guarantee as enrollment is increasing, the amount that we would receive per pupil would actually go down because the total revenue stays the same as enrollment increases. So your per pupil goes down.
Okay, the next question is related to the fiscal forecast of $200,000 per household in this potential development. That seems a little bit high. What was the methodology that was used to develop that household income?
That's a really great question. I would love to talk to someone about that has better information that can share with us, honestly, because there's not a lot of data that we can pull from to determine what the income of residents would be.
But if you're going to afford a $500,000 to $600,000 to $700,000 home, most likely your family income has to be close to $200,000 or $250,000.
With all the taxes, so with
Yes.
the special assessment, with the key income tax, with all of those things on top of it as well.
Jeff, I think there's, just to reiterate about the taxes that the development will pay, what part of those taxes go to Heath or Heath entities and which part come to Granville and Granville entities would be
So,
important.
and this was really a misunderstanding and misconception for Park Trails as well. Because they're in our school boundary, they will pay all of our property tax and they will pay all of our income tax. Just like Park Trails residents did, as well as they paid a special assessment. So, because now they will pay Heath municipal tax as well, but that's the city tax. But for the schools, we will get the taxation that we get from all the other residents from these residents as well.
The biggest difference, Jeff, if I can add, I mean, I know you said this, but just to emphasize, because there is a big difference between Park Trails and this development in terms of the special assessment, because I think people generally assume that that special assessment comes to the schools just because that's how it works for Park Trails. But again, in this case, that special assessment would go to the city of Heath, the revenue would, not to the schools.
Okay,
One more question, Ryan, and then I've got
two more, how about that?
Okay.
All right, thanks. Where will any potential new schools be built, and can we use the land the district already owns? And related to that, on the map it says that there's a place for a school boundary. Did the district have to make a commitment with MI to secure that land on there?
Okay, so just as I said, this is a plot map. This is conceptual. Nothing is in writing that guarantees this school site for us. It was me saying to Mayor Johns, you need to have a school site in that development if you are going to do that. You have to talk to the developer, you have to require it. And so that was just a decision to, hey, if we can get land, we need it. Because just like all the other developers, I'm going to be trying to get land for future buildings as well. So if we can get it donated, excellent. That's 14 acres that we don't have to pay for as a community. So MI put it on their map. They have said to us that that would be something that would be part of their long-term map. So we anticipate that we potentially could get that in writing at some point. But it is on their map right now, and it is something that we argued for over the last year and a half. Go ahead.
And then the last question, this process has been going on for 2 years. Why is tonight the first forum for this, for the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. So honestly, this is the first time that we've actually had a lot of information to share. A lot of it was back of the napkin type of conversations about what could be. But once we got that map, it was perfectly timed for this conversation because then we could talk specifics about what we were given. A lot of the other things were just conceptual. Now, the Strategic Planning Task Force information we've been collecting and sharing at board meetings along the way. So I know that you probably don't like to watch our board meetings, but there's a lot of information there. So please go back and watch because a lot of the information that we've shared in those meetings, okay? So now I have a captive audience, and Dan, I apologize in advance, but related to school funding, a lot of people do not understand this, but right now, Granville Christian Academy is getting almost $8,000 per student, okay? And that is public school or public dollars going to private schools. I'm not saying anything about whether they deserve it or not. What I'm telling you is we receive as the public school $2,000 per student and the parochial school within our boundary receives $8,000 per student. You might want to talk to your General Assembly member about that as well because those are your tax dollars. So again, people are usually floored by that. And I want you to know that, and I'm not saying anything negative about Granville Christian Academy, but I think you need to understand where your tax dollars are going, and if that's where you want them, fantastic. But I have a feeling that you would love for Granville schools to get $8,000 per student for our public schools. So if you want to advocate for that, we can do that together. So we have taken a lot of your time, and you actually stayed. And unlike my presentations at Otterbein, you stayed awake. So, that's good for the most part. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you giving your time and effort. We are creating a frequently asked questions document that will be housing all the other questions. We tried to do as many as we could. And we appreciate your engagement. We want you to stay engaged. So when you see these dates, please put them on your calendar, come back. The conversation will be a little bit different because you now have at least some understanding of the parameters of conversations that have been, or the detail of conversations that have been occurring before. So thank you to my task force members, thank you to the Board of Education, thank you to the community, and have a great night, be safe driving home, avoid